Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installation of Development Action Group's podcast. DAG is excited to have started this podcast that allows for easy access for everyone to hear conversations regarding community development in Cape Town. My name is Crystal Lakayo, your host. Today, we will hear from Nikelwa from Women's Movement, Ntomboxolo from IYM, and Akhona from DAG, who are discussing the outcomes of Urban Dialogue Forum 5 titled Urban Forum 5, a forward-thinking approach to new and existing informal settlements across Cape Town. Dialogue 5, which forms part of DAG's Urban Land and Housing Dialogue series, was an in-person event attended by over 60 informal settlement leaders and representatives from across the city. The dialogue took place on September 17th in Salt River. The purpose of the dialogue was to have an in-depth discussion about priority issues that affect people across informal settlements and to workshop with participants how they can collectively advocate to improve their conditions. Today, our leaders will continue this much-needed discussion, going further into detail of the concerns and opportunities faced by persons living in informal settlements. Stay tuned.
DAG has an urban and housing dialogue series that we are running, and I think this whole thing started in 2020 where we launched our land and housing dialogues, and this was meant to be a space for role players that are working in land and housing. These could be NGOs or community partners and the sort, to provide a platform for them to have an engagement around how we can transform our city and contribute towards a spiritual transformation of our city. And these dialogues happened biannually, and I think the first one focused on the land reform process and how we can collectively advocate for access to land. And I think that's the first dialogue that we had. And these are meant to be platforms where we share knowledge, we share experiences, and also we have expertise in the space that can contribute to an end product, which then becomes our urban land bulletin. And this bulletin becomes some sort of an advocacy tool that we share with the different players in our urban land space. So I think the first one that we held in 2020, as I said, it focused on access to housing and release of work of well-located land in the context of COVID-19. I think that was inspired by the recent hard lockdown and what it meant to people who were staying in informal settlements, considering that people had to social distance, if they had to quarantine, where were they going to get the spaces given the fact that the informal settlements are crowded? How is that possible? And thought about how people can access housing and land in that context. What are some of the hindrances, and what are people getting from the side of the city and from the side of government? So an urban land bulletin was released in that process, and we did have other follow-up bulletins. Yeah. Just recently, as you may know, we hosted our urban forum on informal settlements. We're just trying to think about how, given the fact that we've seen quite a rise in land occupations and those perpetuated by COVID-19 as well, where people, some of the drivers, we are learning from communities that some of the drivers are loss of employment due to the hard lockdown and people being evicted from backyards, and people identifying an opportunity to occupy a piece of land so that they can have something they can call shelter, and their own, a home and a shelter.
And I think more than anything, what it meant for a person or an individual to own a piece of land. So it's not something that was just happening in another place or country. It's something that was hitting home, where now you understand the value of owning land, as opposed to when you were working prior to COVID, you would just pay rent and you would take that for granted. So it became extremely important to be a land owner.
And I think for DAG, one of the reasons why we decided that we should host that platform was because we needed to think about different approaches for new informal settlements, but also for old informal settlements that have been existing before COVID-19 hit our shores. And that was, we needed to have a discussion around what are the priority issues that are faced by people in informal settlements. And we needed to create a platform for those to say these are the priority issues that we're facing as informal settlements dwellers, and these are the challenges, and this is the response, if any, that we've received from the side of the city, and these are some of the connotations around why we are occupying different pieces of land across the city, and how do we then come up with a plan or try to work towards transforming our situation. So I thought I should just give that background in terms of our urban forums, our urban dialogues projects. And I think just for you guys to be able to fit into this conversation, if you can just briefly tell me about when you guys, who are you, when did you occupy the land, and whereabouts within the city, and what are some of the key issues, if you can reflect on that just briefly.
My name is Nikelwa Maqula. I stay in Khayelitsha. I occupied long before COVID. It was in 2018. I was a backyarder. I occupied because the city was going to develop a site near where I'm staying, and in that development they omitted to cater for backyarders, whereas the City of Cape Town's housing policy says that if a particular development is going to happen in a site in a particular area, backyarders of that particular area have to be accommodated in that development. So as our way of showing that we were refusing to be out or neglected, we had to occupy. So our occupation was not one of 2020, it was one of 2018 and others even before that. Well, our main issues basically, like all occupations, is service delivery. Service delivery is our main issue. Also, there's a lack of working together with the government, more especially the City of Cape Town, when it comes to forming a relationship so that we can deal with whatever challenges that we have in our occupation. Government seems to be dragging their feet.
And in terms of the size, how big is the settlement in terms of plus minus, in terms of the numbers?
It's plus minus 250 people. It's not a huge settlement.
And whereabouts are you in Cape Town?
It's in 195 Khayelitsha.
Oh, okay. All right.
My name is Ntomboxolo Fotoyi. I come from Khayelitsha. Our informal area or settlement is situated at Buyasa. We occupied our land at about in 2020, so about two and a half years old. We are about 3,000 households. We have 4 sections. We have phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. How that came about was the fact that COVID took place, or COVID happened. From paying rent, the landlord decided that you're no longer working and I'm not making money out of you, so you need to exit my house. And this brought about, okay, there's no notice or anything, so you need to move. What then do you do? And then we just found ourselves popping up, occupying the land that was available to us, with any repercussion if there was any, because now you are faced with a situation where the back is against the wall, you need to find space and you have children. So that's how we occupied our area. And some of the challenges that we've had, law enforcement, the bylaws, that's constantly harassing us. Since occupying, even though we've secured the space, because after 24 hours, if city is moving you to a different place, they need to allocate you
Alternative accommodation.
Yes, but then even with that, there's still harassment, because with the bylaw it makes it possible for law enforcement to just come and uproot your shack. And you're losing not just the material, your livelihood, because you've just settled there. The trauma that it brings to a parent and children. And also, because there's no employment, people are not, you wake up, there's literally nothing to do. And this brings about obviously stress levels, lack of services like basic services like toilets, water, running water, and electricity. And funny I should say electricity, because now with the lockdown, it seems like this has just been a web of troubleshooting events, because with no electricity, you're more prone to crime or more vulnerable to crime, because it's dark, it's like they are at the peak and they're thriving at taking up people coming from work, the few that's still working. So those are the challenges that we've had: gender-based violence, crime, lack of basic services. And with that being said, I mean, not being able to have running water and toilet, the embarrassment of having to wash in front of your child because you are in this one-room shack, there's no space, and children rebelling against their parents. These are some of the dynamics that come with occupying this land. And you do need space and you have nowhere else to go. So you're having to find means as to how do you function without water, without electricity. So
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to think now of the responses to some of the issues that you guys have faced.
Can I come in?
Yeah.
I think COVID was a catalyst. The occupations were bound to happen because we are 26 years, if I'm correct, into democracy. Yet we have people don't own land. So COVID for me, it was some sort of like, it was a trigger into these occupations happening. I do not want us to sit here and give credit to COVID. It was a trigger waiting to happen because politicians have been sitting in parliament all these years. It's been 26 years into democracy, yet people are landless. There are people that are homeless. So it was bound to happen. Then COVID came, and COVID became a catalyst or a trigger, for a lack of a better word.
Now, I'm saying this now because I'm also just trying to understand. So, what has been your response? And because I want us to also just reflect on the platform that was created by DAG the past weekend as one of the platforms where we try and flesh out these issues. But what have you been doing in your communities in terms of trying to respond to some of these issues?
I think from my community, like I've mentioned, that we're about 3,000 households. We've found that we are all in different spaces, and yet we're calling ourselves different names. But the common goal is service delivery and living under humane conditions. So what we've done is that we found solidarity in standing together, as opposed to just fighting as the group of 20 or 40 people. So there's more volume when you're standing together. So solidarity is key. Not just amongst us here in Cape Town, because we find that what is happening in Soweto and what is happening in Brazil is not different, other than there might be a few changes in terms of dynamics and the laws as to how to go about when occupying this land. So it became important to work with NGOs or companies like DAG, ILRIC, and these are the people who sort of gave us skills as to how can you work in solidarity? Why is it so important that we do these things? And also, the different communities and leaders, how do they come about in terms of strategizing? If, for example, planning a mass action against ESCOM, for example, or city, for example. Because within these occupations, the city and government, they're using disunity. So it's sort of like a system of divide and rule. When we're not standing together, or when they see a loophole where they can say, okay, there's temporary versus a stable way of delivering services, then obviously people's desperations are not the same. So others would opt for the temporary solution, but in South African context, we know that the temporary solution is not temporary. take for example what's happening next to the new way as you're coming in from the N2. You just find these green small spaces of shacks where people have been temporary since I don't know how long, and it's been years. So these are the challenges that we keep are constantly confronted with daily.
Well, it's not like a one community. Like we work together as many occupations. We try to create spaces where we come together as occupations to find workable solutions for our occupations, and we reach out to government. But one of the main challenges is that instead of government, in particular City of Cape Town, recognizing the need for housing, what they've done, they've I think it was last year, September or November, they went on to pass the unlawful occupation bylaw, which gives law enforcement officials the authority to come and see if your house is ready to be a house. If that particular official feels that no, this shack with no window is not ready to be a home, then they will demolish. So that again speaks to the dignity of a person, because now for a person to come and determine what I call a house, my home, a home, it's like that, yes. I think what is also important, what we do in our communities, education, because you find that mostly young people, they're not bothered when it comes to laws, policies, and whatnot, and how it affects them. So when the organizations, these NGOs that we partner with, give us knowledge as community leaders, our responsibility as leaders is go and plow back by either in workshops or in community meetings where we educate abahlali esihlala nabo kwindawo that this is what is happening and this is how we can come up with solutions.
And the other challenge, the other challenge that we have is that city comes not just with the system of divide and rule. They have areas that they don't recognize, and they have areas that they do recognize. And if land, for example, was zoned to be developed for something, say for example ShopRite, or Caltex or BP Garage, whatever the reason, and then you find people occupying this land. And then because there was this big development that was meant to take place for certain stakeholders, then this land would automatically or be said it's not recognized. And they're also using the word councillors to divide the people within the communities, using the fact that these people have less access to knowledge. And they want to push the business agenda to say that this place was earmarked for a mall or whatever, and then these people need to be removed. So that's where this recognized and unrecognized areas, I think, comes from.
I think I need to mention that recognized versus unrecognized. In terms of the forums that you guys have tried to organize and formalize, how has that impacted the work, the organizing work that you're doing? Because some settlements are recognized, some are not recognized. How is that affecting your organizing work?
It has impacted us a lot, because you find that in the settlements or occupations that they deemed as unrecognized, the city is not bothered, they don't care, there aren't services provided to those settlements. And you find that in those where they've deemed recognized, there are services, but even those services aren't as we said, up to standard, and they are not even sufficient for those people that are staying in that settlement. But we as people, well, you know, people will always be able to provide for themselves. We've managed to connect electricity for ourselves. We've managed to connect water for ourselves. Even we've managed to make pit toilets for ourselves where government is not providing.
And also again, these communities become marginalized because we are all in the same struggle, and we've partnered with these communities, and yet they become not recognized. So what we've done is we force the city to recognize them, because through the engagements or the meetings that take place, we then ask them, if you're not recognizing them, then what do you say to them? And you can understand and you see that we are working together, because another thing that we pride ourselves in is collaboration. and working together. So if you're recognizing us, then you are bound to recognize them as well.
And with regards to recognition and not recognizing, Akhona, you find that this term of recognizing, it is what is causing animosity in communities. So you find that there's community A, which is an informal settlement that occupied in 2020, and you find that there's community B, which is like informal housing with your people with plots, subsidies, and title deeds. But you find that, as I was saying to you, that the people have managed to make what I call, a colleague of mine is saying it is people service delivery by connecting your own services, you understand, like electricity. Obviously, these ones do not have electrical poles. They are forced now to connect illegally from those ones that do have. And you find that is causing a lot of conflict because those ones will be experiencing power cuts more often now. So, government needs to step up because really they do have the constitutional obligation to provide housing to the people.
So I'm just going back a bit now in terms of these platforms for engagement. Do you guys feel like the urban forum that was organized by DAG, for example, is an important space for you to organize and share ideas and learn from each other? And maybe reflect on some of the highlights for you.
I think what stands out for me was not too long ago, the previous Saturday. I think what I liked and that DAG brought on the table was that bringing some of city officials on the table for us to be able to have a dialogue with them as to what are your processes when it comes to addressing a certain issue in an informal area. And I think obviously it's not by department, it's so-and-so's department, and the issue of communication that we are not communication friendly. We just want to burn tires on the streets, and we're not open to conversations with the city. And that's actually not the case, because you go to this person's office, or you start from a bottom approach, and you're trying to get hold of HR, for example, to bring to their attention that we're experiencing this problem. What do? They refer you to somebody else. So it becomes a cat and mouse game that sort of eventually you become despondent, if I can put it that way. But through workshops that we had with DAG the previous Saturday, they bring, it makes it possible for us to say, let's have a dialogue. Let's sit around the table, but we need them to avail themselves to us, because as the community, we are always open to conversations. In actual fact, before things get to spiral out of control, we open to conversations with them, but still, it often comes to.
I think what stood out for me is like changing the narrative. Why do people did people occupy? Changing, that is very much important, because people now, those that are supposed to be taking accountability are not taking accountability, because they see occupations as people who did not have anything to do. They were just occupying for the joy of occupying. So we need to change the narrative. We need spaces like this to tell our own stories as people who occupied. And also, I think it is very much important that we bring all the relevant departments, be it from City of Cape Town, from the province, even national government, to such spaces, so that we can be able, because we want to be part of the solution. We occupy because we saw occupying as the solution to government slacking when it came to providing land to the people. So we want to be part of the solution. We do not want to be, it's like a boxing ring now. We want to be part of the solution. And another thing, I think spaces like the dialogue that we had, it is very much important, because you find like some communities aren't working together, and it is equipping us as community leaders as well. And also it is, as my colleague said, talked about governments dividing and rule strategy. It is a way of keeping us together, regardless of class, regardless of race, because the issue of land is not a black issue. it's a colored issue, it is a white issue. So, and it's not about whether you are rich, working class, or you are poor. The issue of land is everybody's business. Because our occupations are affecting those that have, as much as we don't have, but our occupations affect everyone. Because when we go to the streets to take action, everyone is affected. When we connect electricity illegally, everyone is affected. So that is why I'm saying that the issue of land is not for the people that occupy it alone. It's for those that also have informal housing. So it is going to be nice that when we have such dialogues again, we invite all the relevant stakeholders so that we are able to sit in one room and come up with an amicable solution.
And I think one would say that, especially when it comes to the narrative that you guys as occupiers, it's just people who do not have anything else to do. There's also this narrative that we just criminals who are grabbing land as opposed to people who are occupying land. Because there is a great need for that.
And the other term that they use, sorry to cut you, is farm shacking. Is it shacking?
Shack farming.
Shack farming. I actually find that term very discriminating. And it's actually, it's a degrading term because you can't be having a household of 3,000 people and then you want to say that we farm shacking or it's just a disgrace.
I think also when you're saying that with regards to the narrative, I think it is very much important to equip community leaders as much as possible. And also I think the media should play a role because we find that yes, people have because there are dangers to connecting umbani illegally. You understand? People die from that. And also you're talking about the saying that we are criminals. You see, that's why I'm saying that the government is running away from their constitutional obligation, of which we reminded them in 2020 that listen here, your constitutional obligation is to release land. Now they are now fast forward 2022, they are saying there's no land. Yet they were the one that was harboring or farming umhlaba instead of releasing it to the people.
And how is it that there's no land when there are places that they would say this was earmarked for development? It's business mindset behind these things. Because if you're going to prioritize building a mall when people don't have a space to stay and people are not working, who's going to be shopping at that mall? And these places don't have electricity. That's why you're having currently, I heard in the news on my way here this morning that at Site B, 4 people were shot at a Somalian store. I mean, it's like location is a harbor for crime. And then you wonder where these things are coming from. And there's connections within these things. Why must 5 people or 10 people be shot dead over a weekend in order for Nikelwa to come and say we're going to be putting up electricity in this place? That's what they currently did in Monrovisi Park. They've only started recognizing the place and earmarking or developing it for electricity. Because why must it take such a tragic event for people to be rendered services that they vote for? Because the very same areas that they say it's not recognized, they go to those places when they're campaigning for votes.
So I guess the question to respond to them from now, given the magnitude of the challenges that we're seeing in these informal settlements, what do you think guys needs to be done by informal settlement leaders and maybe in thinking about what needs to be done, who needs to be in the room in order to respond to some of these questions?
I think information is important from us as leaders because without knowledge, you're sort of fumbling towards wherever and you don't know whether you're moving forward or backwards. Because once city picks up that you guys are not united or you're not speaking with a unanimous voice, then they see an opportunity that they use to their advantage. Hence, you find in areas that are recognized and that are not recognized. And you also find what councillors who will use whatever tactics that they have where service delivery is concerned to say, this area is not recognized, then therefore they will be not rendered the services that they should. And also city needs to understand that we are people. And there's a reason why we've occupied this land. And with that being said, they come back to the very same people when they want to account for certain things or they want to get funding from wherever. We've done this and that. And they play media as well. Media plays a key role because it shows what is told to show. They don't show all the reality or the crux of things. For example, why would you have students, and not that's a bad idea, but how realistic is it to have somebody who wakes up with a shower every morning, who's able to iron their clothes in a snap of a finger? And then you get these people that are supposed to go into the location and observe and give feedback or reports. How realistic or authenticated is that information? Because you're not speaking with somebody who stays at a location. So through such interventions, I think they have unrealistic approaches to solving the issue and also playing this cat and mouse game that we're not civilized, we just want to burn tires. And things need to reach a boiling point for such things to happen. But now, through knowledge, our people are learning that we don't need to burn the clinic because you're going to build that very same clinic and your children need this. So we're trying to find different approaches in order to make city listen to us.
From my side, I think nothing about us without us.
So true.
We need to create a space where all the relevant stakeholders, from national up until the ordinary person on the street, sit in one room and we come up with a workable solution. We need that platform. And also we need to educate the people that we're representing about these things. I think that one is very important because people have grown complacent in our occupations. People need to realize that the issue of land is not only about having a roof over your head. There is a bigger picture. Because law enforcement can come anytime and demolish. You need to be secure where you are staying. Do you own the land where you are staying? Because people have occupied. The question should be asking, what now? People have been staying in occupations without services for almost 2 years. What now? There have been fatalities with regards to people going to relieve themselves. For instance, I think it was a week ago in COVID-19, in 114 Mfuleni, a child drowned. Because in these facilities, in these occupations, there aren't any recreational facilities. The only way you can come up with a solution, because we cannot sit down with the mayor alone and think that we're going to come up with solutions. We need the mayor, we need the premier, the MMC, the MEC, the minister, the president need to come and sit down so that we come up with workable solutions for our respective communities.
And I guess one of our event forum and space is trying to create a platform for collective advocacy on our side and learning, cross-pollination of ideas and so on. And I think as one of the outcomes of the DAG, as you were part of the DAG, is that we need to create a space for engagement, as you're saying, and we need to reach out to the city and so that we can have a platform where we engage meaningfully and that what we'll do from the dialogues is to develop some sort of tools that will feed into an advocacy strategy or an action plan. So we are, as DAG, going to organize follow-up sessions where we develop this action plan and that will fit also into our advocacy strategy. And I don't know if you have any last input.
Just to add to what you said, I think a realistic approach is important. It doesn't just help to march, go to a place, hand out a memorandum and then come back. We really need to have a realistic approach where development is concerned, because we are open to solutions rather than the current problem that we have. And also not staying in a shack forever. That's not the goal, to just occupy and be living in this shack. Development needs to be an approach like a long-term goal. Exactly, because this is not just, Cape Town, if you're looking at, you're coming from Stellenbosch and you're driving to Cape Town, what you see on your left is a hard and sad reality of the inequality within Cape Town. Cape Town is supposed to be a beautiful city. And when these spiral events of crime are popping up, it makes them look bad to the world. Kanti, there is a solution where they just have a realistic approach and they sit down with us. And also with this development housing that is currently taking place, there needs to be some accountability. Because if you've been in a waiting list since 2016, it shouldn't take you 45 years in order to get. That's not acceptable. And there's development each and every financial year end. Kanti, who is benefiting from this development? And how realistic is the space? Say, for example, they move you from your one-room up shack, and they're moving you into the small, I don't know how many square meters these flats are. How realistic is that? Because now you're moving into this space, you're having to get rid of your fridge because the space is too small. So we really need a realistic approach where they're speaking to the people involved, not just going from an upper scale where they're talking to students who wake up with a shower in the morning. We need a realistic approach.
So I guess the last question before we can end this conversation is, what is your message to the city of Cape Town, municipality? If you could just say a few things.
My message to the city of Cape Town, they need to account. They need to account. The city of Cape Town, the housing waiting list has been on backlog for quite a number of years. So is the backlog for the waiting list for the province. It's been in the backlog for quite a number of years. But now, people have occupied. And they are saying that there's no land. Whereas we know that City of Cape Town has land here in Cape Town, provincial government has land, even national government has land here in Cape Town. They need to account, they need to stop playing duck and dive with people's dignity, because there is no dignity in staying in a shack. I'm staying in a shack, I do not feel dignified. I might look beautiful now, but I do not feel dignified coming outside of that shack. There is no dignity in staying in a shack. And nothing about us without us. They need to involve the people in whatever they do. The policies shouldn't be, this public participation policy shouldn't only be there on paper to make the city beautiful. That okay, whenever we're going to do such so this and that, we go to the people for public participation. Public participation needs to be practiced. Because as I said earlier, that last year, instead of recognizing the need, they passed that unlawful occupation bylaw. More than 8,000 signatures were submitted at the Civic Center, but they didn't even consider that. Yet there in Sea Point, I don't know what they were going to build, but it was only 2,000 signatures that were submitted, but they answered the call. I mean, whose mandate are they serving? That is a question we need to ask. Whose mandate are you serving? Are you serving the mandate of the few that have, other than the majority that don't have? They need to, regardless of whoever voted for you, if you received your votes in Constantia, it doesn't matter if you didn't receive any votes in Khayelitsha, but serve the people. You are in government, serve the people. The people want service.
The other thing that city needs to take into account is that the people that you're dealing with coming from the location, they're not dummies. These are people who have intellectual capacity just as they do. And for things to get to burning of clinics and tires, it's really not the appropriate way of doing things, as it sets back everyone involved. Because a city can't be doing development over a clinic or a school that has been burnt down. This sets us back either way. There's no one winning. ESCOM, the issue of service delivery, where electricity, I don't know how much it costs ESCOM to fix a danger box that has exploded. So either way, there's no city without the people. That's one thing that city needs to not take for granted. So it's not a question of what city should do. City knows what they're expected to do. They know that the fact that they're being ambiguous about their waiting list or the housing list, they are aware of the issues that brings about. And calling us people who take up space land invaders or criminals, that's another. I mean, if you're constantly telling a child that you're a bad child, what are you expecting from that child? That's what the city is currently doing, so they really need to do away with that. Otherwise, you forever have the shacks as you're coming from the airport on your way to Cape Town. And this will just be a cycle of gender-based violence, crime, and lack of development. Yet money is spent or is pumped in every year.
All right. I think as DAG will provide that space, we'll continue to try and provide the space for engagement, and I think we'll provide the support where you guys are able to reach out to the city and try to come up with this platform, because I think this the lack of engagement from the side of the city was highlighted in our recent urban forum. And I think we need to create that platform where we reach out to the city and create this platform for engagement. And I think we'll also try and develop some program materials and tools that we can use to feed into our advocacy strategy. And I think there will be a forum engagement where we'll try and co-create this action plan that we'll take forward.
Okay.
And I wish to take this opportunity as well to just thank you guys for your time and coming through to have this conversation. This is only the beginning of the work, and it may be that the solutions are not in sight now, but we need to continue organizing. I think the underpinning thing to us is for us to continue organizing.
That's so true.
Thank you.
What an amazing and powerful discussion. Thank you for listening to the first installation of DAG's podcast on the Urban Land and Housing Dialogue series, Urban Dialogue 5. Please stay tuned for future podcast episode releases. Until next time, thank you.